Hi class. So today I'm going to be talking about the film Sita Sings the Blues. It came out in 2008. It's by animator and director Nina Paley. You might notice that this is not a work of ancient literature. It's a little bit different from some of the things we've been talking about in the class because it is pretty contemporary. There are two reasons for my assigning this. The first is that this film brings up a part of the Ramayana that our text doesn't deal with. I think it's important to show you all aspects. Well, we don't even cover all aspects of the Ramayana, but I think this particular aspect, which is Sita's continued exile after the reconciliation with Rama, I think it's important to give you those details. Secondly, I assigned this because it fits well with our third assignment, which asks you to think about the modern resonance of an ancient story by making an argument that links a more modern text with a more ancient one. And so this film does exactly that. It's a modern retelling of an ancient story. It reveals some of the potentials that exist in the ancient story for meaning, but it also demonstrates the sort of context that we as contemporary consumers expect in a time that might have some different values, some similar values, but also some different ones. So I hope that this is a good example for you thinking about assignment 3. In fact, you could write about this for assignment 3 if you'd like, or something similar. Okay, so let's get started. My goals for today, talking about Sita Sings the Blues, is also in line for some of you guys in assignment 3. We'll be talking about film or some sort of visual media. And so I'm going to briefly introduce reading or interpreting visual media in film, in case you want to use some of those skills for assignment 3. We'll talk specifically today about shot composition, meaning like how is the camera shot composed? Like what is the director choosing to focus on or to leave out or to frame, and why? Note, consult essay resources. There's links on the A3 prompt about these resources for film and media, visual media. We'll talk also about music in the film. So these are the two things that make contemporary art very different from the ancient world. In a film, you can have this visual component and also this audio component, in addition to the text of the film, the like dialogue and written materials. So navigating all of those components can sometimes be a challenge, but they also produce opportunities for thinking about how you might write an essay, because you have all of a sudden all these different parts of a film that can count as your evidence as you make your points. Okay, so that's one of my goals. Another goal is to talk about the film itself through its various animation styles. Nina Paley is this very skilled animator, and she uses, I think it's at least 5 different animation styles to tell her story. So it's this very layered story with multiple stories going on at the same time. So we'll think about how the animation styles structure the narrative Nina Paley is trying to create. Then we'll talk about the new material, the stuff that's new for us as readers of the edition of the Ramayana that we read, which was excerpted heavily from Kamban. It's by Naranjan, who's a poet, and it's a translation of Kamban's translation of Valmiki's original. So it's very convoluted and kind of distanced from the original. So anyway, we'll talk about the new material, the stuff that Naranjan and Kamban both leave out, but that is part of Valmiki's original, apparently. And that is the moment when Rama listens to gossip he hears in his kingdom, gossip about Sita and her fidelity to him, and he banishes Sita when she's pregnant. Okay. All right, so this is copied from assignment 3 prompt, so this is just a sort of do a plug for noting this part of assignment 3. There's 3 different links here that I've given you access to. Timothy Corrigan is a really famous critic of film. He wrote this kind of definitive guide to writing about film given you chapter 3, which goes into detail about film-specific techniques that you can write about as you are critiquing or interpreting a film. This is the same guide that is given in USC's film school, so feel free to save it for future use. For something more general, I have a friend who created this rather kind of simple suggestions for reading movies, he called it. And so feel free to look into that. It just details various bits of evidence you can consider when you're trying to interpret film. And then this is a professor that I had at USC, Tanya Modletsky. She's a prominent film critic and writer about gender and sexuality. She wrote this feminist critique of Hitchcock's films, and I included short excerpts of her take on Vertigo. So I've just given you some paragraphs to read through and just to kind of note how she summarizes a scene that she'll later interpret for her argument. So feel free to look at all of these. They might be useful as you write about film if you do so for assignment 3. Okay, and they'll probably help us here too. It's also possible to talk about film without being very precise. And so that's kind of what I have in mind here for talking about shot composition in film. So this is a screen grab that I made from one of the early shots of Sita Sings the Blues. And so this is how how you should think about shot composition is it's as if you're behind the camera. Like we in the audience are looking at the screen here. In a sense, we are standing in for the eye that is the camera lens. So the director also viewed the scene before us. So our position as audience is kind of roughly equivalent to the camera lens. And so we can think based on how we see, how the image appears to us, we can make some arguments about what the director is trying to suggest by how the shot itself is composed. So you can think about like framing, for instance. So we have this like rectangle, which is how movies typically are constructed. What is the thing that you notice about the frame? What do you notice in the frame? So like I'll start detailing stuff, just bits of evidence. So I see space. There are little stars around, and it's black. Apart from the central image that we see that's so colorful. So maybe I might say something about the contrast between the darkness of space and the very vivid colors we see in the image before us. You might extrapolate from that further. What is this image before us? Why is it appropriate that it is so striking in relation to space? Why are these figures in space at all? These figures are Shiva, the god that we've been talking about so often in the Ramayana. Rama is an incarnation of I'm sorry, it's not Shiva, I'm sorry, it's Vishnu. So this is Vishnu, sorry, get my Hindu gods mixed up. So this is Vishnu, the blue guy. He is the god who Rama is the incarnate of in the Ramayana. His wife in the divine universe is Lakshmi, and that's who we see here on the right, Lakshmi. She is the goddess who Sita is incarnate from. So that might tell us something a little bit, that we don't see centrally Rama and Sita necessarily. We see their spiritual forebearers, or the spiritual version of them, the more cosmic, divine version of them in Vishnu and Lakshmi. We also see another little figure there, the little dude in the middle. You guys know who that is? This is Brahma. Brahma is the creator god in the Hindu universe. He's one of the 3 main deities. What do you notice about him? He's kind of in the center, it seems like. Well, maybe not the center totally, but he's certainly in between Lakshmi and Vishnu. What do you notice? Do you see that little green line that's connecting what Brahma is standing on and Vishnu? It comes out of his belly button, which is rather interesting. We see 3 navels here. One is connected to a lotus bearing Brahma. And very interesting. Why does this make sense to have Brahma coming out of Vishnu's navel or belly button? Brahma is the creator god. In a way, it almost looks like Brahma is Vishnu's baby, or maybe that might be inverted. Maybe Vishnu is Brahma's baby, in a sense. This might seem strange, because usually women are at least biological females, are the creatures that have placenta that connects them to their babies, their fetuses. But here we have two male gods connected by a sort of placenta-looking thing that's actually a lotus flower. The lotus flowers are interesting too, because in the movie, lotus will become a big feature. Lotus is also part of Vishnu's iconography. Vishnu, when he's depicted in Hindu traditions, he has these 4 arms. He has a conch shell in one of his hands, a wheel in another, often a lotus. And so we see 3 of those here. He's often also, in iconographic traditions, he's depicted as reclining on a snake chair kind of thing. And so here he is. In fact, when we learn in the Ramayana that we read that all of these iconographic features from Vishnu become also incarnate in Rama's existence. I think Lakshmana is the snakes that Vishnu reclines on. Lakshmana is Rama's brother. So anyway, interesting, potentially. Okay, so I'm just talking about a bunch of things. These might not feature in your interpretation of the frame, but we can start trying to kind of like point towards that way. What do we think that Nina Paley, as the director, is trying to suggest by this composition of characters? What do you notice about Vishnu relative to Lakshmi here? I happened to do a screen grab when Vishnu's eyes were closed. They aren't always. But one thing we can notice is there is a little bit of a difference in how the 2 of them are relating to one another. Lakshmi her eyes are looking at Vishnu. She does seem sort of like, not only in her eyes, but maybe in her physicality as well, she seems geared towards him. She's literally like massaging his toes and like legs and stuff. She's kneeling where he's reclining. You know, she doesn't seem as at ease as he is. He's literally got his hand behind his head, like he's, resting. Like he's got everything going for him, really. And she's here to kind of cater to his self. It's rather interesting. Nina Paley, I mean, this is rather simple, I think, but this sort of power dynamic between them where the Lakshmi character seems to be catering to her husband. Nina Paley, I think, is trying to make a suggestion here. And I say that because this frame, this shot, is paralleled at the end of the movie with a very similar one, which I'll show next. So what do you notice that's different now? I mean, we have the same setting of space, these kind of like divine figures, of the universe, basically. But what do we notice? Now it seems like the central couple, the power dynamic is inverted. We have Vishnu here kneeling and rubbing Lakshmi's feet and legs. In fact, his hands look a lot like hers did. He's kneeling just like she was. He's got a lot of his iconography, but not everything. In fact, the iconography usually associated with Vishnu is now associated with Lakshmi. She's got 4 arms. She's reclining. She's got the wheel and the conch and the lotus. She's looking directly at us, where he is looking at her. Usually in film, when you have a character looking directly at the camera, this is an important moment because they're looking directly at us as the audience or as us as the stand-in for the director. It's a confrontation. People in acting will call it like addressing the 4th wall. So like, here's 1 wall, here's 2 walls, here's 3 walls. These walls are okay for actors to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean a confrontation with the audience. They could be looking at anything, really. If they're looking, up or to the sides. But when an actor looks directly at the fourth wall, directly at the audience, directly at us, that is usually a sign of something. Look at her face. How would you interpret her face here? The animator made choices. She certainly seems more powerful here, to my mind. She's more upright. Here she's got her head kind of tilted. So does he. His head, I guess it's a little less tilted, but hers certainly is very straight. Like, she's very upright. Even though she's reclining, she's facing us directly. And so I think by putting these two shots kind of as bookends to her film, Nina Paley is suggesting that there actually isn't much difference between Lakshmi and Vishnu. That we might assume that because he is male and she is female, in a tradition that is so patriarchal, we might assume that she's subservient to him. But Nina Paley is suggesting that, like, actually they kind of partake of the same essence. They're both divine. Why is it so strange for him to be subservient to her sometimes if they are both gods and if they have the same capacities? In fact, the Lakshmi character literally is appearing as Vishnu here. Why couldn't she be the sort of preserver god? Notice also that Brahma doesn't exist in this second frame. I find this interesting. Like, we talked about other myths that male figures tend to take on the visual imagery of pregnancy. Here, clearly that's what's going on. I mean, this is how close to a placenta can this get? It's literally coming out of a belly button. That's where babies, hook up to their mothers in the womb. Here, however, we're not emphasizing Lakshmi's maternity, even though she is a mother in the story. It's kind of interesting. I wonder what Nina Paley is suggesting about maternity or creation here. But anyway, I think the focus is centrally on Lakshmi here. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so this is some of the things you can talk about, like, why is Nina Paley, like, bringing our attention to this cosmic layer of space? She's inviting us to think about the divine in an interesting way and asking a question about, the relationship of gender to divinity in this story. So we'll say more about that, I'm sure, as we talk together, but I'll keep going. So not only is visual interest important to this film, but also the music. And our animator makes explicit, reference to that through her animation too. I mean, this slide here it's also early in the film. Lakshmi kind of comes out of the water to put a record on. So, like, our animator Nina Paley is emphasizing through her animation that music is going to be a central feature to her story, and in fact, it really is. Like, so music is gonna feature. One thing to kind of keep in mind, Nina Paley has written about this. So I'm kind of quoting her, paraphrasing her. She was reading the Ramayana and felt that Sita, as a character in the original, didn't really have much of a voice, and so in this film, through music, Nina Paley is giving Sita a voice. Specifically the voice of Annette Hanshaw. So Nina Paley has also written about this, that while she was reading the Ramayana, living in India, she also became very enamored with the musical numbers that were popular in the 1930s by Annette Hanshaw, this American singer. Annette Hanshaw, this is what she looks like. She's kind of a typical flapper, if you know that style of it's like an era of fashion. It's roughly in the 1920s and 30s. You might think of The Great Gatsby. If you've seen a movie of The Great Gatsby, flappers are the young ladies who, they dance a lot. They wear shorter skirts than their mothers did. Their skirts are shorter. Their hair is shorter, more masculine in a sense. It's just by masculine, I mean it's just like not long. And, very vivid eye makeup, kind of cute little lips and stuff like that, whatever. So, if you know the cartoon Betty Boop, she's typical flapper. Annette Hanshaw. So here are the musical numbers that are included in the film. These are all Annette Hanshaw songs. The one that I've put in blue here, Mean to Me, this is the one that Nina Paley was especially drawn to as she was thinking about this film and got her sort of central idea for it. Specifically, this song, Mean to Me, it's a pun on meaning, like interpretation, meaning, and mean, like cruel. So the singer, she says, like, mean to me, why are you so mean to me? Something like, baby, can't you see how much you mean to me? So this sort of pun on both of those things, like how much she feels for the person she's singing to versus how mean he is to her. More about Annette Hanshaw. She's famous, all of these count under the genre of a torch song. She's famous for being a torch song singer. A torch song is a very sentimental love song, but it's a doomed love. So the songs that she's always singing are about a love that is unrequited, meaning she feels the love for her audience, but the audience is withholding or doesn't feel the same about her. The torch song tradition comes out of the blues, and you can kind of see some of the depressing and very emotional aspects of the blues even in these songs here. So the blues is, just to be clear here, we could do a whole semester on the blues in sort of the American tradition of songs, but the blues comes out of the African American experience in America, that is linked to their status as former slaves, enslaved, and the sort of Black experience in America. And so, like the blues, when a man, it's usually male singers, when they sing "I Got the Blues," they have a lot of reason to have the blues because they're dealing with a lot of pain and trouble, and some people might say even trauma, and so they're singing about it as a way to get those emotions out. And so some people might say that Annette Hanshaw, in doing these torch songs, she's a white lady. She might be, appropriating this tradition that she doesn't have the same connection to. On the other hand, torch songs do have this connection to gender in a really interesting way. Most torch songs are sung by women. And we can kind of see why. Just culturally, these kind of unrequited love songs, they kind of strike people as rather pathetic. Like you want to kind of tell this woman singing these songs like, girl, get a grip. Like, you need to dump him. He's being such a dick to you. Sorry for using that language. But like, all of this emotion and pain being spilled onto a person who is not treating you well. But that's kind of the point of the torch song. The torch song is like, the singer of a torch song is so in love that she doesn't really care about her own self-respect. So this all speaks to why Nina Paley was drawn to these torch songs in relation to Sita's experience in the Ramayana. We'll talk about this in our synchronous class. Sita goes through a lot in the Ramayana, and to my mind and to many people's mind, I'm not sure exactly how much what happens to her is her fault. Does she really deserve to be treated the way she is treated by Rama? And so, in a way, Nina Paley is kind of thinking about what it means to be a woman disappointed. She's empathizing a lot with Sita, and she's empathizing with her through this musical tradition and with this personal story behind the film, which is that Nina Paley's marriage was breaking up when she got that the breakup of her marriage was sort of like the ignition for this film, to create this film. And so all these kind of components come together in thinking about her own pain, Nina Paley's pain, thinking about Annette Hanshaw's pain, and thinking about Sita's pain all together, and telling the story through her film. Okay, one other thing about musical numbers is we not only have the Annette Hanshaw numbers, we also have this sort of musical tradition that Nina Paley is also commenting on, which is the movie musical. And so here I think this image shows kind of an animated version of a movie musical. You probably are familiar with movie musicals, if even if you haven't seen some of the like live action ones that are popular, like in old Hollywood. I'm thinking like Singing in the Rain. Um, let's see. I don't know. There's a bunch of movie musicals. Like even like The Wizard of Oz counts as a movie musical. Even if you haven't seen those, you probably have seen maybe a Disney movie. Those animated movies these days they all take the form of a movie musical, and so they sometimes will have these very like theatrical um, what do you call this? The theatrical staging of characters to highlight the emotional register of the song. So this is a song I think it's towards the beginning of the film, where Sita is singing about her love for Rama. This is when they're in the forest, right after they just got married. But you can kind of note here that the musical, this sort of connection to a movie musical is being really clear here. So let's talk shot composition again. Like, what does this shot make you think about? Or, yeah, how might we interpret this? Maybe let's talk about the staging itself. Like, we've got like these sages here, 3 on this side, 3 on this side. They're all facing each other towards the central focal point, which is the couple in the center. We've got these 3 demons who are beheaded. These 3 they're also very symmetrical. What does this make you think about? Like, what does this remind you of? You know, I'm sort of suggesting movie musical, but you might also think like this looks kind of like a wedding. You know, this might be like bridesmaids and groomsmen or something. Um, People in the pews who like you know as the bride in a Western wedding walks down the aisle towards the sort of center part where she gets married. Another thing kind of contributing to that would be whatever these are. They look kind of like rose petals, but if you look a bit closer, it's actually droplets of blood spurting out of presumably the decapitated demon heads. Okay, so what is going on here? What is Nina Paley suggesting by drawing decapitated demons such that it looks like a wedding? You know, while she plays this song where Sita's singing about her love for Rama, her man. Yeah, I find this pretty funny. To my mind, this speaks to the fact that the Ramayana is not ever really told from Sita's perspective. It's told from the perspective of someone who would more easily identify with Rama. You know, even though it's in the third person, even though it's like, well, once upon a time there was this guy Rama, even though there's not like, it's never from Rama's perspective, like, you know, only like it's not like he's telling his own story like Odysseus did at sometimes in the Odyssey. So even though it's in the third person, you can kind of tell that the perspective that's being highlighted is Rama's. We're invited often to think about what we're reading through Rama's point of view, as he's kind of becoming a great demon hunter, as he's like becoming who he was born to be, which is this incarnation of Vishnu. We're never really given any sort of insights into Sita's feelings or psychology. A lot of you guys talked about this in your last post. You know, it's very hard to think of what she's thinking. But here, Nina Paley is kind of giving us a clue about what she's thinking. This might be sort of the visual representation of what her mind might be like. You know, they've just gotten married and then they go into the forest. Perhaps Sita would think of their adventures in the forest as very romantic. You know, she's got her new husband here. He's killing demons, maybe protecting her from these demons. You know, the sages are there to kind of like witness their love. The blood of the killed demons, you know, is like aesthetic. It like reminds her of like romance, rose petals. It's kind of like, a celebration of their marriage, the fact that they're in the wilderness hunting demons. When actually, if you go back to the text of the Ramayana, they're in the wilderness hunting demons and stuff because Dasarata, the king, was forced into giving the throne to Bharata instead of Rama. And so Rama is exiled for 14 years in the wilderness. So they're only really there because of this exile thing, and Sita chooses to go along with him. So anyway, interesting. So, yeah, Nina Paley is trying to really emphasize Sita's perspective for us as a kind of caveat to the original, where we don't really get to see what is motivating Sita at all. Okay, so let's talk about other animation styles in the film. So what I've been talking about so far is like what makes this film different from some of the other materials we've been reading. Specifically, the film-specific aspects and also the music. Nina Paley is this very skilled animator. She's been working in the field for a long time, and she uses the film's animation to kind of explore even more themes from her story and from Sita's story and from Annette Hanshaw's music. Okay, so how do the different animation styles structure the narrative? So here are the animation styles. So the sort of cosmic layer of the gods, what she's using there are basically jointed paper puppets. If you look at those early shots, and then whenever the gods return in the film, they're very they seem almost two-dimensional only. They move in kind of very jointed ways, and so to me, this is my title of them here, but I think that they're meant to look like paper puppets. And then she has the other kind of framed narrative, the Nina and Dave storyline, which is an avatar based on Nina Paley, our director, and her ex-husband Dave. So they're the modern couple who break up, and the animation style used there is called squiggle vision. It's the lines are always moving. So I'll have an image in the next slide to show you that. The three unscripted narrators. So there are parts of the story are told by these three figures who are unscripted. They kind of basically ad-lib and tell their own version of the story. But the animation style used there is traditional Indian shadow puppets and collage. So I'll show you an image of that in just a second. There's one section of the story is told through these Rajput paintings that are animated to depict this the myth in its purest form, which is scripted. So if you guys watch reality TV at all, you know the difference between unscripted and scripted. Unscripted is there is never a script that is written down. No one is memorizing lines as actors. So the traditional Indian shadow puppets, those are literally three different people who were brought together to talk. They aren't reading from a script at all. Meanwhile, the scripted myth is composed of actors who are reading from a script and portraying a character. Okay, then we have the musical level, these Annette Hanshaw numbers, which punctuate the story. Vector graphic animation is used there. It's a different version of Sita here. Then there's the post-breakup scene. This is right after the intermission. So it's right after Sita is burned in the fire, right after Nina and Dave break up, right after the intermission, there's this really interesting scene that's used rotoscope animation, where a woman is dancing and it's very beats are very heavy. It's very kind of cool and kind of psychedelic looking. Okay, so the thing to kind of note here is in each different style of animation, in each different layer of how the story is told, there is a Sita and a Rama figure. In the gods, the Sita figure is Lakshmi, the Rama figure is Vishnu. With Nina and Dave, Nina is kind of like Sita, Dave is kind of like Rama. There's kind of a really cute version of Rama and Sita in the shadow puppet collage, in the scripted myth. There's a different version in the musical level. There's a different version. Sita looks more like Annette Hanshaw. And then there's a version of Sita even in the rotoscope version, which is kind of cool. So I'll talk about all of these more in detail, but just to kind of note here, like how many different versions of Sita exist. And Nina Paley has spoken about this. She was trying to capture how varied the visual culture of the Ramayana is. This is one of those religious traditions where it's okay to depict the divine, and so people do it all the time. And so there's always different versions of Sita, but you can still pick her out, even though she's depicted in so many different ways. And so, in a sense, what Nina Paley is suggesting by all of these different layers is that anybody can kind of identify with Sita. Anyone can. You know, her story is, in a sense, universal. Okay, let's keep going. Let's look at some of these images. So here's the squiggle version, squiggle vision. This is Nina Paley. So it's kind of blurry because it's always squiggled. So in this version, what do you notice? Like, what do you think this animation style is trying to emphasize about these characters? In some ways, this animation style is the least realistic. Like, they literally don't have mouths. They look like cartoons, you know, comics. So in some ways, it's really unrealistic. Like, these don't look like people really at all. Just kind of like silly drawings, very simple. But in some ways, it's very realistic. Like, this is a skyline of San Francisco. This is like a newspaper, right? So like people read the newspaper, maybe not so much anymore, but like in 2008, sure. So yeah, so I think she's trying to make some kind of argument here that this is sort of like the most realistic, the most kind of like mundane, everyday version of the story, and it's this story that is kind of mundane and like banal. Couples break up all the time, you know, unfortunately that's the case, you know. Sometimes marriage doesn't work out. So Nina and Dave, at this point they're in love. Dave gets a job opportunity in India. Nina is able to join him there, and but then their relationship doesn't seem the same, and eventually they break up and get divorced. So this is a pretty mundane story, but also realistic. Maybe Squiggle Vision kind of helps us understand that. Here's the shadow puppet version. So the shadow puppets are the three characters. They're not really characters. They're like, it's kind of like reality TV. There are these three people that Nina Paley met when she was in India. She loved how their voices sounded, and so she invited them to be a part of her movie. Another thing that's great about them is, so their voices are great, that's what she liked, but also she loved that all three of them were from different parts of India. So they grew up with different traditions of the Ramayana, maybe even different languages of the Ramayana. So you can kind of see this as these scenes go forth, like each person remembers a different part, maybe they remember different versions of the story. They're like reminding each other of the plot points in this kind of very charming way. This is, I think it's most people's favorite part, but I love this part, like these three people. And so what Nina Paley did is she got these three people together. They had never met each other before, but she brought them together and then basically just recorded them as they spoke, and they told the story of the Ramayana together. And so like they're reminding each other of all of it, and like trying to remember names that are hard to remember. But remember that these are traditions that each of them grew up with. And they're sort of steeped in these traditions, even if those traditions are like a little bit different for each one. So while they're shadow puppets, the characters they're talking about are in this kind of animation that's inspired by collage. So collage is an artistic style that it's rooted in reality. Like when you make a collage, you take materials from other places and then repurpose them in your art. And so that's kind of what's going on here. In fact, you can see how maybe collage fits really well with this version of the story. These three characters are like cobbling together the story from their different backgrounds and their different memories. And so collage kind of does that too. Like you're taking things from elsewhere and kind of compiling them. Meanwhile, like you might ask yourself, why are shadow puppets employed for these three characters here? Shadow puppets are, what's going on in a shadow puppet is you're filming the shadow of the puppet. So the puppet, like if you're visualizing the screen as like the stage, the puppets themselves would be between the screen that you guys see and your eyes. And then so light would be shown, you'd shine light on the puppets and then film the shadows that the puppets are casting on the wall. And so like, of course that's not really happening here, like the animation is just black with like light shining through, but it's invoking this tradition of puppetry, you know, that does exist. You know, you can go to a shadow puppet show. So why do you think she's using shadow puppets for these guys? To me, in a sense, these three characters, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to call them characters because they're real people, but they are also characters. Like literally there's avatars for the three of them on the screen. So in some ways they're kind of like in between. They're not really on the level of the story like Sita is, but they're not really like us in the audience. They're kind of an in-between. So similar to how shadow puppets work, like they're in between the light that would produce the shadow and the screen where the shadow is cast upon. So anyway, they're kind of like occupying this intermediate ground, and so maybe shadow puppets kind of fit with that. I'm going to kind of suggest something that might make sense in our next lecture. These shadow puppets kind of occupy a similar space as the chorus in a Greek drama. We'll talk about Greek drama next time, but the chorus is another sort of character who's like sort of the audience, but also sort of in the drama too. And so that's kind of a way to look at these three characters here. Yeah, because they tell the story, they're not really beholden to the story like Sita is, you know. Okay, I'll keep going. Here are here's the animation that's scripted, and it's meant to look like Rajput paintings, which were popular in India in the 17th and 18th century. So here's a version of a Rajput painting. In fact, I got, you know, kind of confused. I was like, oh, this is from the film. But no, this is actually a Rajput painting. Here's Nina Paley's like approximation of those paintings. So you can kind of see similarities here. They like a lot of profile or like 3/4 profile shots of faces. So this is the painting here that is actually a Rajput. It's kind of associated with a very high and royal period in India, and so it kind of perhaps maybe Nina Paley is suggesting that like the scripted story is kind of like this very traditional and like very Indian style. So anyway, as opposed to like the Nina and Dave thing, that doesn't really seem Indian. It seems kind of more like American, like Nina Paley is American. One other thing to kind of keep in mind, I don't think I talked about this style necessarily. It does seem kind of similar to this one. But one thing that's interesting that Nina Paley does is she is always reminding us as the audience that what we're viewing is a film. These curtains show up in the middle of the film, kind of reminding us of the theater. Like if you've ever gone to a movie theater that has curtains like this, she's reminding us of that. There's like this fun intermission scene where there's opportunities for more like animation. So like the little monkey guy goes, I guess he's going to the concession stand to get food, and you know the fire guy, he gets Red Hots and a hot dog because he likes fire, I guess. Yeah. So anyway, she's always reminding us of a film, and you can ask yourself like why exactly she's doing this intermission thing. It comes right after the scene where Sita jumps into the fire. So here's the fire kind of tracking behind the little monkey guy. Like, why do you think Nina Paley stops the movie after the fire scene? She's putting a very clear division between what happens leading up to the fire and then what happens afterwards. One thing I think she's doing is can be explored through this rotoscope animation. This is the scene that takes place right after the intermission. We have this animation style called rotoscope. So each of these four pictures are actually screen grabs of the entire screen. So each of them kind of takes up the entire frame. Rotoscope is a style of animation where the animator films a human first. So it starts off in live action. You film a human, and then you animate over that human's silhouette. So this human here is an actress. She's actually the woman who voices Sita in the in this version of the animation. So do I have her? Yeah, it's this version of Sita. So the woman who voices her, the actress, she's the woman who is dancing. And note what she's wearing. She's wearing a typical traditional sari, which a lot of Hindi women wear traditionally. This very musical instrumental scene is interesting. It starts off like the thing that's animated and colorful is her heart, and then it turns into like fire. At one point, she's dancing as flames are falling as if they're tears from these giant eyes. So the tears that Sita cried, perhaps now turning into fire. Maybe sadness turning to anger, perhaps. I don't know. There's a part where the image of the woman, the individual woman, turns into two women. So like her physical being represented by this X-ray looking thing with her skeleton, and then her outline, so maybe inside and outside. Meanwhile, there's a version of, it looks like it's either Sita or perhaps it's Lakshmi here in the middle. But yeah, this may be a suggestion that like the Sita figure, or the female figure, maybe it's even the Nina figure here, being represented by this dancing woman. She's kind of thinking about what herself is now that she has been treated so badly by her partner. So the scene where Sita burns herself also comes just after the scene where Nina is dumped by Dave. Dave sends her an email saying, "It's over, I want a divorce." And Nina also goes through this very emotional conflagration, where Sita, the character in the Ramayana, physically risks her life, in the fire. Nina emotionally kind of goes through the fire as well. Like she has this sort of sadness and anger of the rejection by her partner. So anyway, what was my question before? I was like, why have an intermission here right before this moment of this dance? I think what Nina Paley is suggesting is that the moments where a character is or he feels like they're most destroyed, like Sita feels like she could be destroyed. I mean, she literally could be destroyed when she jumps into the fire, like she could die. Nina feels like she's being destroyed by being dumped. Those moments are powerful and like primal and important, but they're not only destructive. Like they're destructive, but they're also the possibility is planted in those destructive moments for rebirth. So yeah, I think that's kind of potentially what's going on. And this animation style that's so linked to the human figure as it is moving and dancing in this scene, it's reminding Nina, it's reminding Sita that that life goes on even after these moments of like utter devastation and betrayal by their partners. So feel free to talk more about this in your discussion posts or something like this. I find this very moving. In fact, if you've, I think if you've ever been dumped, like I'm very sorry if you've ever, broken up with someone you loved, even if, even if it was your idea. Often people go through moments like this where, you feel so much. You feel so much sadness and anger and betrayal and you just feel everything. And so this might be kind of a good movie to watch when you feel like that. Even at your most kind of raw and alone, those are moments, they typically are moments where rebirth is also possible. It's like a new version of yourself emerges from the destruction of the fire. Okay, so I think I went through all of the different animation styles that I talked about. You can maybe extract from them more in terms of what Nina Paley is going for in terms of the meaning. But I also wanted to talk today about the new plot stuff, the stuff the stuff that's new that you guys didn't read about in our edition of the Ramayana, and that's this. It's encapsulated by this image here. This is the washerman thing. So in some versions of the Ramayana, not the one we read, but in some versions, after Rama and Sita reconcile, so after Sita proves her chastity, proves her her marital chastity to Rama, after that, then they, happily ever after. In another version, Rama starts to doubt Sita again. And specifically, he does so because there's like a washerman in his kingdom, so like a lower class person. So Rama's the king, of course, and Sita's his queen. But this lower class character, the washerman, he has a wife who cheats on him, and he does not forgive her. He kicks her out of his house, basically. And so this kind of starts a rumor in the kingdom that, like, wow, a washerman would not tolerate that kind of betrayal from his wife. So therefore, why is Rama tolerating Sita's betrayal, in quotes, of him when she was in Ravana's house? So to kind of quiet the rumors, Rama kicks Sita out of his house again. Not again, but he exiles her. So this is kind of interesting because Rama himself was exiled by his one of his mothers. So Bharata's mom, Kakeyi. So it's not really Rama's mother, but it's one of Dasarata's wives. So Kakeyi gets Dasarata to agree to exile Rama for 14 years. And that's what Rama decides to do with Sita. He forces her to live in exile in the forest, alone. He does so while she's pregnant. So this is actually, to my mind, it's pretty cruel. Even if Rama is justified in his doubts about her, it's not typically a good thing to force a pregnant woman to live all by herself in the wilderness, in a place where like tigers and monkeys and all sorts of dangerous things live in the forest. So there's this song where it's depicting Rama's his I guess, what would you call this? His cruelty, I suppose, his cruelty to Sita. In this screen grab, this is right after Rama like literally walks over her body, like he doesn't care about her at all. He's smiling, having fun. He's still the king, but she's going to be exiled into the wilderness. She turns into a sort of shadow puppet in a way. It's not exactly a shadow puppet, but she turns blue. This might be interesting, if you were going to write about this film. What is significant about Sita turning from pink to blue? Remember the title of our movie, Sita Sings the Blues? Here she's literally blue. Like, she thought she might have been blue before, but this might be the last straw, He doubted her before, and she proved herself. She proved herself as divine, by jumping in the fire, and the fire god saves her. She proved herself pure, true, almost divine, She literally survived fire. But here she's like literally blue now. Maybe this is a bridge too far. It's like he's been too cruel to her. So when she's out in the wilderness, she gives birth. So this is how the story continues. She gives birth to twins, these two boys who are trained in the forest. Valmiki is actually in the forest. Valmiki, remember, is our poet. He's the guy who originally composed the Ramayana. So when Sita's out in the wilderness, she meets up with Valmiki, which is interesting. Valmiki teaches her children all about how great Rama is. So here's Rama in the background, like this, he looks like a sun, like literally S-U-N, like he's got rays coming out of him, he's huge. He's like a god. And in fact, that's something to emphasize here. In some traditions of Hinduism, Rama is not just the incarnation of Vishnu, but Rama is treated as a god himself. So it's like a human who is a god, in a way. So some different sects don't ascribe to that, but there are some sects of Hinduism that treat Rama himself as a god, not just an incarnation of a god. And so this this scene here, it's like a little bit of a musical interlude where the two boys are learning about their dad and how wonderful he is. And we have this kind of very interesting scene where these lines start popping up so that, you know, with like this bouncing ball, so it tells us what to sing at the right time. If you've seen a movie that has these, it's usually in a sing-along. So it's like a movie that invites the audience to become part of the movie and by singing along. I find this a little disturbing because the invitation to sing along is an invitation to be complicit in this ideology that the song is promoting, which is that Rama is wise, Rama is just, Rama only does what he must, right? Rama's only good, Rama's a god. If that's what we believe, then we would, by extension, need to believe that he's treating Sita 100% justly, that she deserves his cruel behavior to her. And that rubs me the wrong way. I think it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. However, you know, there are arguments that would suggest that Sita is only getting what she deserves by being treated this way. Often when you have like songs like this, very simple songs that are taught to children, it's a way of indoctrinating them into a way of thinking, a way of not questioning something. So anyway, you might have thoughts about those. Okay, the story continues. So out in the wilderness, at one point Rama decides to go into the wilderness. He goes with Lakshmana, his brother that he loves so much, and Hanuman, the monkey servant who was so true to him. So he decides to go into the forest. He comes upon Valmiki teaching these two young men who are so like beautiful and wise and pure and everything, that Rama knows that these are his sons. He's like, yes, these are my sons. Come back to Ayodhya, to my kingdom, so that you can be my heirs. This is interesting, that Rama believes in the legitimacy of his sons, but he still wants to doubt the legitimacy of his wife. You know, it could be argued that he exiles her when she's pregnant because he doesn't believe that the babies in her belly are his. And yet when he meets the babies grown up, he knows that they're his. But he still wants to doubt Sita. So this is an interesting moment. Like, Sita potentially, at least in Nina Paley's narrative, I think Sita realizes that she will never get Rama to trust her completely. He keeps testing her over and over and over again, and putting her in situations that are dangerous for her life. I think we're in this frame, we're being invited to think of this as just another of those moments. He is talking at her. She has got her arms up in prayer position, pleading him potentially, so do her children. Meanwhile, there's another fire between them, you know, literally between them. You know, is he going to ask her to prove herself again, jump into the fire again? Like, that seems a little extreme, you know, like how many times does she need to be tested? But that's not how Nina Paley's story ends. And in fact, this is not how this version of the Ramayana ends either. Instead of proving herself again to her husband, Sita decides to become enveloped in the earth. And so we have this really interesting moments, song where, like, I think like a lot of the animation styles come together. This seems like the cosmic level of space, but it's also translucent. We can see through it. We can see the Annette Hanshaw version of Sita through the Mother Earth figure. Note also that the Mother Earth figure takes on the iconography of Vishnu, but with just different symbols. She's got the conch here, and she's got like a leaf here. I'm not exactly sure what all this means, but I'll remind you, in our first video lecture, there are versions of Hinduism that see Lakshmi, that is Vishnu's wife, as a sort of earth goddess. And so in some ways, Lakshmi, or Sita in becoming part of the earth, she is becoming that part of her divine self that is powerful and cosmic as well, and in a way that doesn't have much to do with Vishnu, her husband, apart from this iconography. So anyway, it is kind of, I think Nina Paley is trying to invite us to think of Sita's return to the earth as a return to herself and her own power, as opposed to her relationship to her husband. And so we have this really cool scene where, these big the very important gods in Hinduism are joined by this Mother Earth figure, that becomes a stand-in for Sita / maybe Lakshmi as well. Here's Shiva, here's Brahma, but the three of them are dancing. And finally, this moment when Sita refuses to take his test again, we get one tear from Rama shed. So this is like his one moment of an emotional reaction to her. She's been crying about him this whole time, basically, but now he sheds a tear for her. You could interpret it like, is he really crying because he's lost his wife? Is he crying for her and how he's treated her? Or is he crying because he wishes he still had his wife and he's still self-motivated, it's selfish? Anyway, interesting. Okay, and then one other thing that I wanted to emphasize in Nina Paley's telling of this story is this emphasis on women reclaiming their power after being put in a position where they're rejected by their partners, their male partners. We have the resolution of the Nina and Dave storyline is Nina. She had to go to New York for some reason. She talks about going back to see Dave, and he's like, "Don't bother. I don't want to be married to you anymore." She, feels very rejected. She kind of has a breakdown, but she's able also to start over. She gets an apartment in New York. It's kind of horrible at first. There's like roaches and everything, but eventually she starts to find herself. She gets a new cat, a little kitty here. She starts reading the Ramayana, and this seems to be suggestion of her inspiration for this movie, that she's going to depict the Ramayana but tell it from Sita's perspective. So from the perspective of the woman who's been spurned. And this actually has connections in the Ramayana itself. This version of a woman telling the story has its seed in the Ramayana. There's a part of the Ramayana that's kind of, it's potentially a throwaway part. You might not pay much attention to it. But one aspect of this part of the Ramayana is that when Sita is banished in the wilderness and she meets the poet Valmiki, she's the one who tells him the story of Rama, and he writes it down. So the Ramayana, that title, is actually the story that Sita tells Valmiki when she's in the forest. So it's a story that demonstrates her devotion to her husband. You can see it that way. Maybe she's just a sap who only supports her man, kind of thing. But you could also see it as Sita is a storyteller herself. And she is the reason that this whole story exists, potentially. And so I think Nina Paley is trying to reclaim that part of the story for Sita as well, that she herself is a storyteller, just like Nina Paley, thousands of years later, is a storyteller too. And that you can tell these stories through your pain. And so I'm going to end it there. I hope we talk more about this film. I hope you liked it. I look forward to our synchronous class together.